the SBIR Read-Fire-Aim presentation. Our goal today is going to be to talk about SBIR, but to talk about SBIR in maybe a little bit different way. We're not talking so much today about how to apply for SBIR or what SBIR is, but really how to make the most out of your SBIR grant and leverage SBIR to move your technology through to commercialization success. So with that, let's get started. So quick agenda overview here. So our goal here, I am going to talk just very briefly about SBIR. I'm assuming if you're watching this, then you're familiar with SBIR and you've seen some of the SBIR programs and understand what SBIR is. So I'm just going to very quickly go through that and then get into the Read-Fire-Aim conversation. And then after we go through that and introduce the Read-Fire-Aim concept, then move into some application. And so we'll look at how do you apply Read-Fire-Aim or Ready-Aim-Fire into from an application perspective as you're advancing your technology. And then we'll end with a little bit of Q&A. So again, very brief. So what is SBIR, STTR? Well, it is a very large federal program that provides early stage seed investments into high-tech, high technological risk startups and small businesses. So it's a $3.7 billion per year program. It makes about 5,000 awards per year. So it's a very large federal program, which has a significant impact. So SBIR, STTR, those are both acronyms. So SBIR stands for Small Business Innovation Research. STTR, which is the sister program, is Small Business Technology Transfer. I will use SBIR to really mean both. The difference between the programs is very minor. And so when I say SBIR, I'm really meaning both. They are federal programs. They provide grants and contracts to small businesses. Some agencies do grants, some agencies do contracts, some agencies do both. And the program is administered by the U.S. Small Business Administration. So the purpose of the program, again, is to commercialize innovative, scalable, high-risk technology. So this is a startup that we're talking about. And it's a high-risk, high-technology risk startup. So we're not talking about money to do commercialization and like market launch and other things like that. What we're talking about is monies to de-risk the technology. So these tend to be deep tech, innovation-based companies that have the potential to have a high impact and to scale very rapidly once the R&D process is resolved. And again, so another purpose of the program is to really promote private sector investment into this class of startup technologies. So these technologies would typically be very early for private capital to come into, but with the addition of the SBIR, STTR funding and the federal funding to help de-risk the technology, it becomes much more attractive. And we're going to talk a lot more about that. From an eligibility perspective, it must be a for-profit company. So these funds can't be to a university. It has to be to a for-profit company. It has to be to a small business, has to be to a US-owned business. And there are some special rules about small businesses that are owned and controlled by VC firms and other types of private capital. That doesn't apply to earlier stage angel investment and earlier stage capital. So those are definitely okay. And as we said above, that's even the purpose of the program. So we're going to talk a lot more about that as we go through today. There are 11 federal agencies that participate in the SBIR program. 5 of those agencies, the largest 5, participate in both SBIR and STTR. Those are Department of Defense, Department of Energy, NIH or Health and Human Services, NASA, and National Science Foundation. So those are the largest by far of the federal agencies. The other 5 agencies or other 6 agencies participate only in the SBIR program. but again, all 11 agencies are participating in this program at some level. It's important to know, and I'll just move on here to the next slide. It's important to know as we talk about what the SBIR program is, that each of those 11 federal agencies has a unique SBIR program. So when we talk about those programs, it's important to know which federal agency you're applying to and make sure that you understand the rules of that federal agency. And then some of the larger agencies, DoD and NIH, for example, they even have nuanced differences within different funding organizations within DoD and within NIH. So it's really important to understand who you're applying to, understand the rules for their particular SBIR, STTR program, and make sure that you are following those rules, because that's the agency that you plan to work with. But again, at a high level, and these are the guidelines that are developed by SBA. It's a 3-phase program. The phase 1 program is intended for demonstration of feasibility. It's typically a 6-month project for $150,000. That $150,000 varies widely based on agencies. So it could be $100,000 with some agencies, could be $225,000. It could be as much as $500,000 from some agencies, depending on various exceptions. The phase 2 is competitive based on performance in the phase 1. And with the phase 2, that is intended to be further R&D around the same project. So it's considered an SBIR pathway that you're going through. Phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, that entire round is for commercialization of one technology through the process. So that's an additional 24 months and $1 million. And no phase 3, no money for phase 3. So it's a 3-phase program. Phase 3 is the commercialization, but there's no SBIR or STTR money in phase 3. There are, and some of the agencies post phase 2 SBIR programs, and there's other opportunities to have funding to advance the technology with some of the agencies. So again, you just have to know your particular agency. The small business maintains the IP rights. These are highly competitive. And so typically you're looking at about a 10 to 20% success rate on phase 1. Phase 2 is typically a little higher success rate because you have already gone through the process of the phase 1. So only people that are successful in phase 1 can apply for phase 2. So they're a little more, a little bit less competitive, but still a very competitive program. And this is an important piece, is that it's vetted by a panel of technology and business experts. So as we're going to talk about, you're using SBIR to leverage that to move into working with other partners or to getting investment by other types of capital sources. It's really, you can really use the fact that this is a highly competitive program and that the technology has been vetted by a panel of industry experts. So once you get awarded, your technology is now kind of in the club. You've got the ability to really to leverage that success that you've had to be able to do some further things. So let's get into the SBIR Read-Fire-Aim issue. So we want to just first look at what is the problem. So let's begin with an ideal commercialization process, and every ideal commercialization process starts with an idea. And so maybe that idea comes in the shower, maybe it comes as you're walking across a campus or outside somewhere, maybe it comes in the research lab, but you have your light bulb moment. And what's the first thing you're going to do? Well, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to file for a patent, because you need to get some patent protection around your idea, around your technology. So you file your provisional patent, and the next thing you do is you say, well, I've served on about these SBIR grants in the past, so I think I'm going to apply for SBIR. I can write grants really well. And so you apply for your SBIR, you're a great grant writer, so you're successful and you get your SBIR awarded, and then you're going to do some research. So you're going to go into the lab, you've now got let's say a couple $100,000 at least of federal funds to go in and do some research. And from that, then let's say you're successful with your research and you might loop back and be able to apply for more SBIR money. So maybe that is you progressing from the phase 1 to the phase 2. Maybe it's from a phase 2 to a phase 2B, something like that. Maybe it's that you were able to get a whole new round of SBIR money, a new phase 1, phase 2 round based on some things that you've come up with in the research. You may also, as a result of that research, most likely you're going to be creating new intellectual property, and you'll be able to apply for new patents. So, and the current patent that was the basis of your original idea, that one's going to progress. It'll continue to mature. And then the research that you're going to do, you're going to be able to apply for more patents on that. And maybe even your research results in a new idea. And you go through the whole process again. You can start again with a new patent, new SBIR, new round of research. And so when we look at this, and we see a lot of companies out there that do this, and we kind of call this the SBIR treadmill. So they just get on this idea, patent, SBIR research, and they just keep going round and round and round. Well, what's the problem with that? Well, it's a lot of fun if you're a researcher and you really enjoy doing this research. But the issue is, and the problem is, that we like to think of going from idea to impact. And when we have our ideas and we have our technologies, our mission is really to develop those technologies and to create impact in the market. Impact for people and financial impact to get a return on investment at minimum to recover the patent costs and other costs of doing the R&D. So let's say you decide that you want to take one of these technologies and you want to develop them and move them to the point of impact. Well, so you might say, well, I need an investor. Well, in this case, we've represented an investor as a big bag of money. And we've done that very intentionally. We represented that investor as a big bag of money because as a researcher, that's the way you think of an investor. You don't think of them as adding any value because they don't understand your research and they can't add any or contribute anything to the research. So the only reason you want to talk to an investor is because they have the ability to give you more money. The other thing that you could do is you could talk to a corporate. Maybe you talk to a company that you know of that is in this space and may be interested in your research or your technology. So you call them or you talk to them in some way and you say, hey, look at this great SBIR funded technology that I've had. Wouldn't you like to buy this and go commercialize this? So what often happens, and too often happens if you follow this type of a commercialization process, you follow the Read-Fire-Aim process, is that this is not going to work. And what they're going to tell you is the ubiquitous, you're too early, which is one of the worst things that you can hear as an entrepreneur. You've been working on this, you've got millions of dollars invested, you've got great tech, and they say you're too early. And the next thing that happens is your whole business goes up in smoke. And sadly, this happens a lot more often than what you might think. Now, the smoke is not white puffy clouds. The smoke is red clouds for a reason, because this smoke is representative of the blood, sweat, and tears that you've put into this company at this point. You might have employees that are counting on this for mortgages. You might have invested personally. You may put a lot of money into this. You've made sacrifices for your business, and now it's not going to go beyond the SBIR funded R&D, and that's a problem, and that's what we want to avoid. So what we want to do is we want to look at a different path and a different mechanism. So what really went wrong here was that the work in the SBIR and the work that you did around that SBIR, you didn't talk to the people out here that were going to be integral stakeholders in commercialization of this technology. You didn't talk to investors. You didn't talk to corporates. You started with your idea and you made a bunch of assumptions whether you knew it or not, you made a bunch of assumptions around the value of that idea and around what added value to that idea. And you pursued this entire SBIR pathway around assumptions. And when you finally at the end got ready to talk to investors and talk to corporates, they were the first people along the way that told you that there were some assumptions here that you had wrong, and as a result, there's really not a lot that can be done. So instead, we want to do a different process. We want to fix the order. We want to do the ready, aim, fire process. So let's walk through this again with the ready, aim, fire process. So again, we have our idea. Nothing's changed there. We're still going to go ahead and pursue patent protection on the technology at this point. So we file our provisional patent. But the next step that we want to do, we are going to eventually apply for the SBIR and do the research just the way we did before. But there's a very important thing we want to do. We want to insert a new step. And so as soon as you have done your idea, or you've got your idea, and you filed your provisional patent, what you can do is you can now go out and talk to potential corporate partners. And you can approach them with your patented or patent pending idea and talk to them about what did they see as the value of the technology, what do they see as the positioning of this technology in the market, what's their level of interest, given that presumably they're in this space of potentially taking on your technology and incorporating that into their sales processes and adopting or licensing or purchasing your technology and adopting it into their systems. And they're going to give you a lot of feedback. They're going to tell you what is good, what's bad. They'll tell you if they're interested and when they're interested. They'll tell you what types of things you could do, either within a university setting or through a small business, to add value to that technology. And they're going to give you just a ton of valuable information because you sought their advice. You went to them not trying to sell them something. You went to them seeking their advice, their input, and their feedback. So from that, you can take their advice and you can use that to really adapt what would be your SBIR project. So you're no longer going to go in with invalidated or maybe false assumptions about what success looks like, but now you've got this feedback that you can incorporate into your SBIR proposal, and now you've got a much stronger SBIR proposal. What else could they do? Well, they might actually give you a letter of support that would make your SBIR proposal even stronger. So not only have they given you feedback that you can use to adapt your research plan and you understand what tasks really add value, but maybe they've also said, hey, we've looked at this, we're really impressed with this technology, and we're very interested in this. We want to work alongside here. We want to follow this and track this, and we may be interested at some point. That adds a lot of value to an SBIR application as the reviewers see that, to see a letter of support on company letterhead saying that they've looked at this tech and they're interested. That adds a lot of value. Maybe they even go further. Maybe at some point along the way, maybe this is in phase 2, they come along and they say, well, not only do we want to continue to watch this, but we actually want to help you. Maybe they say, we have access to people, we have access to equipment, we have access to maybe different supplies, maybe we have access to or we know about how this technology is going to be applied in the marketplace, and we need to evaluate your tech under certain conditions or certain circumstances. They can really play an integral role in helping you during the research plan that is funded by your SBIR. And you're adding just tremendous value at this point. So what if we also, in addition to talking to corporates, we also at this point talk to investors, and we said, we're pursuing this, we're talking to some corporates, we have some ideas here of things that we want to do moving forward. Is this something that you may be interested in supporting? So maybe in phase 1, they give you a kind of a generic non-committal type of a letter. Maybe as you move on to phase 2, they're even giving you a little bit stronger letter. Maybe they say, look, we've been watching this. We're really impressed with this entrepreneur, really impressed with this technology. We're impressed with the way that they're working with the corporate. Maybe they're willing to give you an even stronger letter of support. And maybe as you're pursuing the research and your technology advances, maybe they're even willing to come alongside the SBIR and invest. And maybe they're willing to say, we're going to give you some additional capital that doesn't have the limitations. The SBIR grant, it has limitations. It's fabulous money to help with the R&D, but there are limitations around what you can do with those funds. So for example, you can't pursue patent protection. You can't do certain types of marketing work and other things like that. Maybe the investor money can be used to complement the SBIR funds to help you move faster, or to be able to surround this technology with a more complete system that will add value. So there's some other ways that they could potentially help too. So maybe between the investors and the corporates, maybe you need to expand your team. And maybe they have the ability from previous investments or from previous working relationships to invest, or to recommend some people who may be some valuable additions to your team. And those people could come on in various roles as your company matures and the tech matures and your company grows closer to the market. Maybe you need to really start bolstering this overall package with some really talented team members, and some team members that have talent in other aspects of the business other than just the tech. So that's one way where they can really be valuable. Another thing that I've seen happen and can be incredibly valuable as you're moving forward and this technology is maturing, maybe you need to sit down and have some conversations, some negotiations with different people. And as you're doing those conversations, maybe that's not your strength. And maybe when they come on as a member of your team and you're a part of their portfolio now, maybe they actually want to help you out. Maybe they want to, are willing to sit in some of those meetings and help with some of the negotiation processes. Maybe it's with later stage capital. Maybe it's with certain strategic partners. Maybe it's distribution channels and other people like that down the road. They can really add value by coming in a role like that. Another way where they can help, I've never seen an SBIR company that couldn't use some help with financials and developing pro forma financials and projections and business models and looking at financial models and other things like that. Some of that really starts to get very sophisticated as you begin looking forward. And maybe one of your investors has a background in doing that kind of work and can help you really add a lot of value to your company by helping you with the financials. And finally, let's say you really start to scale up and this technology moves forward and you need to start doing some things from a business operations, manufacturing type. Maybe you get some early customers that you're working with, and maybe they have experience in working with those types of large operations, and they can help with adding process, adding systems, adding various things that need to come along and surround your technology to really give it value. So all of those things are things that by talking to corporates and talking to investors early on, you can really lay a path forward for your technology to grow into a very valuable company. And if you do that, and after some period of time and the technology's matured, you come back to that corporate and you talk to them now, it's a very different conversation than what you had before. The likelihood of that corporate being in a position to buy your company at that point and take that technology into the market is much higher, because you've really intelligently designed your entire process and leverage that SBIR funding to build a very valuable company that really does have the ability to create impact in the marketplace. So just to review, why Ready, Aim, Fire? Well, so this early validation of assumptions is just really, really critical. So you being able from the earliest days, from idea, filing your provisional patent, and getting some validation on the problem, that this is a problem that needs to be solved. This is a problem that the market agrees with you, with your assessment of the fact that there's a problem here that your technology has the ability to solve, and also that your tech may be the right solution for that problem. So getting that feedback early on is just incredibly valuable. Another thing that, startups are all about risk. And when we look at startups, decisions in startup companies are made about risk and mitigation of risk. So as that entrepreneur, one of the things that's the easiest thing to do is to overlook that risk. And so by going out and talking to corporates and investors early on and getting them on your team early on, you're really getting an independent assessment of what does that risk landscape look like. And as you look forward to commercialization of your technology, it's sometimes really hard to get a handle on what risks are out there. These guys are going to be able to tell you that, and probably tell you that very freely. They're probably more than happy to share with you the risks that they see in this process. Obviously, this is informing the commercialization pathway. It helps you to understand what are the steps that need to be done to commercialize this. What does success look like in this R&D pathway? I think one of the most important things that they can do in this is to tell you what specific tasks, as you're looking at developing this technology, add value and what tasks don't add value. So you're going to spend a tremendous amount of money on various tasks. You want the money that you spend and the time you spend to be investments into your technology that can produce a return. And so by getting a clear understanding from people from the beginning of what types of things add value and what types of things don't add value, it helps you to select and really focus on the ones that do. Obviously, if something's not adding value, we don't want to spend time and money on that in the process. It also, if you're in the position of the tech transfer office, or if you're a startup company that's filing your own IP, man, getting some of this feedback early on in the process will inform your expenditures on IP. So from the time you had the idea to pursue that provisional patent, you might have spent, a couple $1,000s, maybe up to $5,000 getting a provisional patent filed. That's just the tip of the iceberg to what money is going to need to be spent to prosecute that patent all the way through to an issued patent. So if you understand some things early on, it can help you to say, well, maybe we don't want to pursue that. Maybe we need to go after these claims and not those claims, because we understand how this technology is really going to be applied in the marketplace. So it just does has a lot of value in helping you to think about that. It also helps to think about, as you move from provisional to non-provisional, well, maybe you want to go beyond US. Maybe you need international protection. And what jurisdictions do you need to be filing for that protection? So getting some feedback early on from corporates and others about what does that market landscape look like, an international market, that can help decide, do we want to invest in international or do we not? Ultimately, as you begin to think about this, you'll start to think about your IP and the funds that you're spending on protecting your IP and building an IP portfolio around your technology as investments into your technology, just the same way the technical and other aspects are. Obviously, you've got a much, much stronger SBIR proposal if you do this. Coming in with an SBIR proposal with these ideas worked through and a clear commercialization strategy from the beginning of your phase one, just adds tremendous value. Even and then the letters of support and other things are just icing on that cake. Finally, I think it's just really important when you've got multiple people involved from the idea stage to commercializing a technology. These are many-year processes. and tremendous amounts of money invested through this process, it's really, really important to have alignment of expectations. So as you've got multiple parties involved and everybody having understandings between one another about what this process looks like, you can really align your expectations and move into this position where you have this shared risk reward, where everybody defines success the same way. And that's success of this technology making an impact in the marketplace. If you can get to that point with this alignment of expectations, then you really got strong potential for this technology to move forward. I know what you're saying. So you've read this book too. And so the lean startup, and yes, a lot of the things that I'm saying here are from the lean startup concept and lean principles. For those that haven't read it, this is an absolute must read, strongly recommended. And just a quick review. So the book involves a couple of key theses. So one is that the entrepreneur superpower is the ability to make these leap of faith assumptions, to be able to go from idea and be willing to invest time, money, resources, and everything else on faith-based assumptions, and to not see or perceive the risk associated with that. That's what being an entrepreneur is all about. But instead, what we want to do with the lean startup principles, we want to follow this build, measure, learn feedback loop. And we're going to talk a lot more about that, and you'll see elements of that as we move forward. And then the last concept is that we've got this idea of the minimum viable product, and we're going to talk a lot more about that as we go forward too. So the Lean Startup is a good book. One of the things that you'll often hear, particularly from the deep tech perspective, is that, well, that's just for software and IT. And that doesn't really apply to deep tech startups. That doesn't apply to health techs and other things like that. But you know, the lean concept really does. And so the tool that we use and that we've really come to like is this How to Build a Startup series from Steve Blank. Steve Blank is the patriarch of the lean startup movement. The book, The Lean Startup, was really based on Steve Blank's teachings. And this series is actually used in programs at the federal level with SBIR, in the I-Corps program. And we at University of Kentucky use this in a number of our programs. So there is a version of Steve Blank's teachings around this that is available on the Udacity platform. And this is available free to charge to anybody. So there's a really good series of videos there that talk a lot about lean startup and lean approaches and what really a startup is, and how to commercialize things with a startup. This is just really, really solid information that you can use if you want to do the Ready, Aim, Fire version of this process. I'll mention here the Launchpad Central platform and encourage you to check that out if you're running a program at your university. That Launchpad Central platform is something that we use in some of our programs. And what it does is it's really an entire software as a service, cloud-based platform that's built around these lean startup teachings and gives you the ability to identify your assumptions and the customer discovery work and all of that goes along with following these lean principles. So that's something that you might want to check out as well. So if this works so well, why aren't we all doing it? Well, the short and simple answer, and you know, the thing that we don't want to overlook here, is that this is very, very hard. Going out and interrupting the idea and the process and the enthusiasm of taking idea and moving it very quickly into the research phase and inserting instead some of this work around customer discovery and market work and other things like that. It's hard work. And it's not something that that comes naturally to a lot of people. So that's a big reason why people don't do this. It is just very, very hard work. Another reason, and I see this a lot with all kinds of entrepreneurs and all kinds of startups, is that there's this mentality that we want to protect our IP at all costs. costs. So we want to keep it very tightly held. We want to keep this as a secret until we're ready to tell the world. We want to make sure nobody knows what we're doing. And the problem with that is that it really creates these problems of having these assumptions that are not validated. And you're really putting a lot of work and a lot of time and a lot of investment into an unproven idea. And your IP could be worth a lot more if you can go out and build the right process around it. Obviously, tech transfer offices across the country tend to be very understaffed. So that's another contributing factor if we're talking about technologies that are coming out of a university. They don't have the resources to put into programs like this. So that's another contributing factor that plays into this. And ultimately, the reason that that's important is because the skill sets that are required to do this work are very different from the skill sets that are required to do the basic technology R&D work. And so when you've got a different set of skills that are required, you have to have different people. And so we have to have resources to surround this technology that are business types of expertise, and you need to include those people, as we've seen here, from the very beginning. We can't wait until at some point down the road we're going to bring in our business guy. That doesn't work. We need to bring in the business guy from the beginning and those business expertise. Maybe it's not a business guy, but we need to bring in those business expertise from day one. And we want to begin to talk to our market and talk to people about what we're doing. Definitely, because of the different skill sets that are required, this is very intimidating. So technical founders that have never had these types of conversations, never thought about these aspects of business and markets and other things like that, this is very intimidating for technical founders, but they can do it, and they can do it with some help. Finally, another reason that people are hesitant to do this is because the funding incentives are not aligned. So if you come out with your idea and you go through your provisional patent and you jump right into SBIR, well, you can get hundreds of thousands of dollars to jump into doing more technical work. And it's, there's no direct, immediate financial incentive or even financial programs to help offset the costs of doing some of this early stage work to aim before we fire. And so that's something that long-term would be great if we can fix systemically, but just be aware that this is something that is a concern. All right, at this point, I want to jump into some applications. So what does it really look like as you're taking a deep tech and really trying to apply lean startup principles? So I'm going to approach this from a myth perspective and debunk some myths here. So the first myth that we're going to talk about is the myth that my startup is going to be the next Apple. We're going to start in the garage and we're going to grow to the most valuable company in the world. And that's the dream of the startup entrepreneur. Well, that's a myth. And the reality is that a startup is a temporary organization that is intended to search for a repeatable and scalable business model. So this is Steve Blank's definition of a startup. So what does that mean? Let's unpack that for a second. So a startup is not intended to be, in this case, Apple's 40, 50 years old at this point. That's not the intention of the startup. Most startups last, say, 3 to 7, 8, 10 years, something like that. The intention of that startup is not to go out and be the most valuable company in the world. The intention of that startup, and particularly a deep tech startup, is to develop that technology to the point that it can be placed into the market by corporate concerns that have the pieces of the business strategy and things like that that are going to be necessary to take it beyond the R&D phase and into global manufacturing and distribution, sales, support, other things like that. So a startup is a temporary organization, and it's designed around search. It's designed around the ability to search for a business model and search for a way that this technology fits into the overall market landscape to create value and to create impact. So another thing that we're going to do in this section is we're going to use these pop-up bubbles to talk specifically about deep tech and how does this myth and the debunked myth applied directly to startups or to deep tech startups. And in this case, are different than a lot of software startups and other things like that are maybe more typically practicing the lean startup principles, because deep tech startups are often acquired before the technology even goes to the market, before a technology is introduced for commercial sale and there's revenue generated off of it. So if we think about a pharmaceutical or a material or algorithms and systems or subsystems of larger systems, a lot of times those startups are acquired and then incorporated into the larger product. So the first time an end consumer ever touches a product that includes this technology is in somebody else's product. So this is especially true for deep tech startups. All right, our next myth is, I have great tech, it's worth millions, where's my yacht? And the reality is, it's not just about your technology. It's not about your technology. It's not just about your technology. It's about a lot more. And so your idea is really the center, the core of successive rings that go around that idea that create value. And this illustration here, whether these are the exact right things that go in those rings or not, I don't see anything that's necessarily wrong, but this may or may not be the right set of rings for your company, but for any company, the idea has to be surrounded by other things. So there's those other pieces that you need to bring to the table. A lot of business things, a lot of other aspects that take that technology and really allow that technology to create value. And it's when you build these other pieces of the technology that you begin to really create value and the ability for this technology to go out and create impact. And again, we want to circle back on our deep tech and think about which particular things in your case add value and in your case do not. And again, that's going to be specific to every technology. Every technology, there's going to be parts that add value and parts that don't. And that's up to you as the entrepreneur with your customer discovery and your work as a part of aiming to go out and figure that out. Just as an example there, maybe your technology is going to require a manufacturing plant in order to produce your technology beyond like a benchtop or lab type scale. It may or may not be valuable to you to go out and build a manufacturing plant. If your acquirer isn't going to use your manufacturing plant and is just going to shutter it after they buy you, then you haven't really added value by building that manufacturing plant. So that's one example. Regulatory is another one that tends to be very different. So in some cases, if you're in a regulated environment, getting through the regulatory piece is all of the value. And in some cases, the acquirer doesn't want you to do that. They want to be the ones that do that. They want to acquire your technology and they want to have their people working on the regulatory pathways. So you really just have to talk to your eventual acquirers, talk to the people in the corporate space, and find out in your particular example, what things should you do and should you not do that are going to add value. I want to talk a little bit more about this because this is such an important piece, and give a couple of examples. So I talked before about risk and risk assessment, and this is an example with the technology readiness level scale that the Department of Defense and NASA use in evaluating technologies. And so it's a really great tool. It has the TRL level for technology readiness level, TRL level 1 through 9, where at the bottom 1 is at the idea stage. It's very basic research. And 9 is this is deployed in a system that's ready to go out and be put into the field. So in the case of DoD, supporting the warfighter. In the case of NASA, maybe being put into a mission. And the goal of DoD and NASA's SBIR programs is to move technologies from a lower TRL level to a higher TRL level. So maybe it's going from TRL level 2 or 3 to 4 or 5, 4, 5, 6, somewhere in that range. So maybe in phase 1, you take it 1 bump, and then in phase 2, you might take it up another 2 or 3 bumps. But at the end of the day, they understand that when you complete your SBIR round, you're not going to be at a 9. Your technology is going to be at a 5, 6, somewhere in that range. And in order for you to move it up to the 7, 8, 9 level, you need to be working with prime contractors, and your technology needs to get integrated into that larger system. So that is a really key part of the DoD SBIR program as they think about this. And they'll talk about TRL level a lot in their SBIR program. So I have worked with a number of DoD SBIR companies, and the people that I work with in those companies, they tend to be very mature companies, and some of the leaders and operators that I've worked with in DoD SBIR companies tend to be great. Really, really solid people. But this technology readiness level scale only addresses one component of risk, and that one component of risk is technology. When other people are assessing risk of a company, so for example, investors or acquirers or other people like that, they look at a lot more than just the technology as the only risk. So they're looking at many other aspects of the company when they're assessing risk. And this is a tool that's produced by Village Capital, and it's the viral pathway tool. Just to introduce it really quickly, on the left side, you have just like on the TRL, you have level 1 through 9. So they followed that TRL level as that part of the assessment. And on the right-hand side, what they have are the types of what can happen with the company at this stage. So maybe they're eligible for a certain type of investment or a different type of investment, and then at the top maybe for acquisition by a corporate. And then along the top and the bottom are the headings for the risk categories, and they actually identify 8 different risk categories here on the viral tool. And you can Google this tool and it'll come up for you. But the 8 different categories that they identify here are team, market, problem and vision, business model, value proposition, scale or scalability, the product, and your path towards an exit. So each one of these 8 levels or categories of risk are assessed, and based on where you are as a company in each one of those 8 categories, you get an aggregate level of risk for the company. So one important thing is that the minimum ranking or the minimum level of the 8 categories is the rating of the company. So it's not the average, it's not the peak, it's the minimum. So it's the weakest link that breaks the chain. So if everything else is great, but you don't have a team, or it's not scalable, or you don't have a market, or you don't have exit partners that you're looking at, all of those things really limit the overall risk assessment of the company. The other thing I want to talk about very quickly is if you're in a regulated environment, how risk affects you and how you can add value. So this is specific not only to medical, where you're talking about medical regulatory, but if it's EPA, USDA, if there's any type of regulatory environment that your technology is working in, then you need to be aware that the regulatory process defines your commercialization pathway. If you're not moving through a regulatory process and doing things that are consistent with the regulatory process, you're really not advancing your technology. So you need to just be aware of that, and you need to allow that regulatory process to help you define the timelines, the type of work, the stages of the commercialization process. All of that is really dictated by the regulatory pathways. So the good news is that those are very well known, and you as a startup can understand those. And when you talk to the corporates, you need to understand that that is the language that they are working in. So they're going to be able to talk to you. And again, the tasks that add value all relate back to that, that regulatory process if you're in a regulatory environment. When the handover to the corporate can occur. So when do they want to look at acquiring you? So, you know, maybe if you're a pharmaceutical, maybe they want you to get through clinical trials. Maybe they want you to get through stage 1 clinical trials, phase 2 clinical trials. And, you know, you can talk to them and understand. Maybe they want to acquire certain types of pharmaceutical companies might want to acquire at the pre-INDA or pre-IND stage. So you talk to them and understand what that appetite is and let that define the stages of your commercialization. And then finally, you want to communicate with the corporate in regulatory language. So even though we in the lean startup world might be communicating with some different types of languages and some different understandings, when you start talking to corporates, they are talking in the regulatory language because that's the world that they live in. So it's really important that you understand that and that you're communicating to them in those words and in those tools. And so here's one example from the FDA medical device world. They follow with the FDA medical device regulatory pathway follows this water flow engineering design, where you begin with user needs and go from user needs to design inputs to a design process, design output, and then a medical device. You've got verification, validations, and reviews. You also have along the bottom here your design history file, your device master record. Risk analysis is a big important part of that process, and quality systems are an important part of that process. So for you to understand those things and to be able to communicate with corporate about, we're at the stage where we've identified a set of user needs. We have a design output or a design that has been verified. We have gone through a clinical trial to validate certain aspects of this thing. They've all been documented in a design history file. If you can communicate with the corporate in that language and that vernacular, you're adding tremendous value to your technology. All right, our next myth is I have SBIR funding. I don't need investors. I just want to use my SBIR funding. I've got all the money I need. I don't want investors. Well, to debunk that, investors add a lot more than money. They add a lot of value beyond the money. And we talked about that early on or in the Read-Fire-Aim. So you want to engage them as early in the process as you can. And so the holy grail here is that you have the ability to take SBIR money, and with your SBIR money, you're attracting corporates. With the SBIR money and the corporates, you're attracting investors. With the SBIR money and the investors, you can attract corporates. It's an interwoven process that you as the entrepreneur have to spin that web. But by doing that, you can really leverage your SBIR money to create tremendous value in the marketplace, as we've shown. Myth: if I can just capture 5% of the market, I'm all good. I'll be ready to exit if I can just get such a huge market. If I can just get 5%, I'm all set. I've heard this one over and over and over, and unfortunately, that is just not true. And as an entrepreneur, you can't be thinking in that context. So the reality is that market dynamics are defined by this concept called crossing the chasm, and profits occur when you get to the mainstream of the market. Profits don't occur in the first 5%. So you need to understand and define your crossing the chasm strategy. So I'm going to dive in just really quickly to this. I don't have time to go into this in detail. But the crossing the chasm, this book is from the early 90s. So this is an old book at this point. A lot of the concepts in this book are really commonplace language. We don't even realize that we're pointing back to crossing the chasm when we say a lot of the words. But really the thesis of this book is that our market is 100% of our market here is illustrated by the area under this curve. 100% of our market is not homogeneous. So we're not, the first 5% doesn't look like the next 20%, but that there are these groups within our market that each individually define a different buying segment. They have different expectations and they have different needs and motivations. Their relationship with you is going to be different. So at each one of these different market segments, the people that are in those market segments are different. And just really quickly, those market segments are the innovator segment is the blue at the left. The early adopters is your next segment. And then these two together, the blue and the yellow together, are the mainstream. So this is early majority and late majority. And then finally, we get into our laggards. And this is the chasm that is the namesake of the book. So we won't get into the detail there, but I do want to talk just very quickly about this innovator market segment, because as an SBIR funded company, that's the segment you're dealing with. When we talk about who is your customer and we talk about who is the user and we do kind of high level market work, you're really thinking about this group of people. But within our SBIR, we're talking about this group of people over here. So let's look at those in a little bit of detail. So our innovators, they are people who they understand the pain point and they desperately need your product. They have a need for your product that they're willing to deal with the fact that it's not perfect. They're willing to deal with the fact that they may have to go through some extra pain in order to utilize your product. Maybe it's not supported by different things. Maybe it's buggy. Maybe it crashes. Maybe it doesn't integrate with other systems. There's some manual processes around it, but still their need for your product is so deep that they're willing to deal with all of that in order to be able to use your product because it solves just a piece of that pain point for them. So let's look at some dynamics of this customer segment. So first of all, the relationship with the customers in the segment is going to be very tight. These people are going to know you. They're going to know you by name. They're going to have your cell phone number. They're going to call you when your product doesn't work. They're going to call you when it crashes. They're going to know you really well, and you're going to know them. The operations that you're using as a business in this stage are not scalable. So you're doing things in this stage in a very small scale. You're only doing a few customers, a few products. You are not intending here that these operations are going to be scalable for the mainstream. We're only doing these operations. We're only doing this product for this innovator customer segment. Business metrics, don't worry about business metrics in this stage. That's not the goal of this stage. It's not to show profitability. It's not to show what is the market willing to pay. It's not to show any of those things. It's to show that the market needs your product, and it's to show how when your product is taken out of a research lab and put into a real world environment with this innovator customer segment, that it can really truly add value. So this is very unique, and understanding this is incredibly important as you move into the commercialization process. So our next myth is, do you have a prototype? And this one really gets on me. So the truth is that you will have many, many, many prototypes, and we call these your MVPs. So don't think about it as, do you have a prototype? Think of it as, which prototype are you doing? What's the purpose of this prototype, and what are you doing? So, and for our deep tech tip, it's really easy with SBIR money to dive in and say, well, I'm going to skip everything I know and everything that Lean Startup teaches us about making these build, measure, learn feedback loops and to move slow. We're just going to put a lot of money into building one product, one prototype that does it all, that we can test everything. And the problem with that is that you end up spending way too much money. You build your product and your prototype on a lot of unfunded assumptions or unproven assumptions, and you really overbuild that prototype. So what you want to do is you want to carefully define the purpose and use that purpose very carefully or that prototype very carefully just to accomplish that one purpose. So in the Lean Startup materials, they talk about, Steve Blank talks about two different types of prototypes or MVPs. They talk about a low fidelity MVP. This could be a one-page sales brochure. It could be a wireframe diagram of your website, or a wireframe instance of your website. It could be a 3D printed plastic model of something that's not ever intended to be 3D printed. So the goal here is that this is something that's very, very inexpensive to generate, and that serves a purpose within a bigger picture. And they talk about a higher fidelity prototype. So this is maybe a works-like prototype that doesn't look great, doesn't have some of the features and things like that, but it does have some functionality to it, or maybe it's a really high quality 3D model or something like that, or a simulation of something that you can use. It's really important as you go through this process to understand the minimum set of features. So that's a key part of understanding your MVP, is to understand that this only implements a minimum set of features. This is not implementing every feature that you envision, but we're just trying to prove the minimum part that this works. And finally, is as we go through the lean startup process, we're really following the scientific method. And so you're following the scientific method from all the way through, from hypothesis all the way to research and conclusions. And in lean startup language, we're talking about pivoting or persevering. You're going to follow that scientific method. So your MVP becomes the apparatus. That's your experimental apparatus of answering a question with the scientific process. So whatever that question is that's defined with your hypothesis, you can go through and really limit down the MVP by understanding that all we're trying to do is support this experiment. We're not trying to build a product that does anything beyond that. We're just trying to answer the questions with this round of the scientific method. This is our apparatus. So again, back to this medical device example with our water flow diagram and our water flow process. So where in here does the MVP exist? So how do these worlds come together? Well, when you're first coming up with your user needs, and you really just have to kind of sit down and talk to people about those user needs, and go through and think about other products and what your technology would be. As you're working through the user needs section, you're going to use probably a low fidelity version of your MVP. So maybe that cut sheet, maybe a feature sheet, maybe some very easy version of your product that you can use to talk to people, just to support conversations and tease out what are those user needs. Another place where it comes up as you're going through this process is in the design output. So if we're trying to test a certain feature or certain capability, certain aspect of the design, then you may generate a higher fidelity MVP that you can use for verification testing. And so with this works-like prototype, or this functional prototype that you would have here, you'd be able to use that prototype for certain testing. But again, it's not everything. The last place that it might come up in this water flow diagram process is if you need to do a validation, like a clinical study of a validation process. You might need to actually generate a version of the medical device that you could use to support the clinical study. Again, this is where it's important that your MVP is only implementing the most important key set of features. Those key sets of features, if you can identify what those are and what you absolutely have to support your clinical trial, then you design that device much more cheaply, and you can really focus it in just on implementing the key sets of features that you need it to have. With that, we will wrap up, and I will be happy to answer any questions that we may have. So as we land here, not only my contact information, but also 4 books that are must-reads for startups are here. The Lean Startup and Crossing the Chasm we've already talked about. The Startup Checklist by David Rose is an excellent book that I highly recommend for beginning startups. So this is 25 chapters. It's kind of arranged as an encyclopedia. Really easy for you to go to the chapter on the particular topic that you're wanting information about, read a few pages. It's an easy read. Highly recommended. And then as you begin to think about talking to investors and understanding the language around investors. Some of that is in the startup checklist, but then the venture deals book by Brad Feld is an excellent resource for that. So Jackie, do we have any questions?
Yes, Eric, thank you for that wonderful and informative presentation. Our first question is, they would like to apply for an NSF SBIR digital health clinical decision support concurrently with NIH SBIR, the NIDDK clinical research, with separate budgets for use. Can this be done?
So yes, you can. So the way that you can go about doing that, you can apply for either the same proposal submitted to 2 federal agencies. You are allowed to do that. You're only allowed to receive funding from 1 federal agency to do a particular scope of work. But in the event that, so you're allowed to submit in parallel and just only receive the funding from 1. But you can also submit 2 parallel proposals that have different scopes of work, different budgets, different goals, and receive funding from both at the same time. So that's perfectly legitimate. The one piece of advice that I would give if you're doing that, that second path where you're submitting the 2 parallel proposals with different scopes of work, is realize that the people that are looking at scopes of work and double dipping and other things like that and asking those kinds of questions tend not to be technical people, but tend to be administrative people. And it's extremely important that you are very clear in the way that you present things, and the way that you write your scope of work, and the way that you present the overall project. If they're in any way complementary, you need to really draw distinct lines that say this work is doing this particular set of tests or answering this particular set of questions. This complementary work is doing this other set of questions. So if you can think about sitting down with a non-technical person with the 2 proposals sitting side by side, you want to be able to very clearly point out this proposal A is doing this and proposal B is doing this, and this is why this is not double dipping. So that will be extremely important to you down the road. Remember, when you submit these grant proposals, they are public, or not public, but they are record. They're on record. These are official documents that will stay with you for years to come. And many different types of people may be looking at them from different roles of people is what I mean by that. So people in different roles, either within the federal government or external to the federal government, could potentially at some point be looking at these proposals. So you need to think about that as you submit your proposal.
Okay, we have another question. Can you address the role of developing a business plan in the SBIR STTR process, its benefits, and who can assist with this?
So a business plan is actually something that we encourage you not to do, a business plan, quote unquote. And if you search business plan and it talk about writing different sections and different things like that, those are things that we really encourage you not to spend time as a startup doing. But your SBIR, particularly your phase 2, will require a commercialization plan. We do encourage you to develop business models, and really everything that we've talked about here today are tools and pieces that go into a business model. And so these are all tools for you to develop the business model, understanding your regulatory, talking to corporates, understanding the financing, understanding the timing and tasks that need to be accomplished. All of those things feed into your commercialization plan or your business model. And as you are developing the phase 2 commercialization plan, everything we've talked about today, you just want to work through these things and then populate the commercialization plan in the sections that it asks for. And so as you work through the things that we've talked about today, that will be excellent groundwork for you to write your commercialization plan.
Is there a conflict of interest for the tech transfer office to work with PIs in participating in the SBIR STTR process?
So the question here would be around the word participating. So depending on how you were to, or what you intend by the word participating, there could hypothetically be a conflict of interest, but as a general rule of thumb, I would say that there would not be a conflict of interest with the tech transfer office working with an entrepreneur to help develop an SBIR plan and the tools and all the things we've talked about here today. So as a general rule, I would say no, that there should not be any kind of a conflict of interest there. You know, the university has a vested interest in seeing that the commercialization of that technology. So there's, in my mind, as I said early on, the alignment of goals and the shared risk reward concept, that would be the goal. I wouldn't see that as a conflict of interest at all.
And then we have another one that they are learning from some other entrepreneurs that they have been asked to tweak their SBIR applications, NSF and NIH, into the COVID-19 track, despite their tech being non-COVID related. Thoughts on this? Theirs is an indirect COVID solution, but we could incorporate COVID-19 into the roadmap.
Okay. So what we've heard from some entrepreneurs that have been asked about this and that have inquired about this is that the COVID-19 funding, at least right now, is intended to be very narrowly focused on things that are directly related to COVID-19. So things that have the ability to make a direct impact on COVID-19. That said, I think that like anything else, like the COVID-19 pandemic and the crisis that's happened around that, there are some companies that are going to really face a lot of hardships as a result of that, and where this is going to be a very negative thing for their company. And on the other hand, there are some companies where this is going to create tremendous opportunity. And we have seen already a number of companies that we work with where the COVID-19 crisis has been an opportunity for them, and where they have a technology that either directly or indirectly works maybe on the health side or maybe on the secondary aspects of what's happened, but where there is an opportunity. And so I think that you know, if there is an opportunity there, I don't think that there's any concern at all with a company going out and applying their technology maybe in a different way, or maybe looking at how does this technology solve a problem today that we didn't know existed yesterday. I think all of those things are very appropriate. So if you can find a way to do that, I think that's great.
And our last question is, how important is it to file a patent before submitting phase 1 proposal?
So this is not a straightforward answer. So if you want to go down the pathway, the Read-Fire-Aim pathway, where you have the idea and you submit your SBIR grant, your SBIR grants technically don't count as public disclosures, and the review process is confidential. So you can get away with submitting your technology before you have filed a patent on it. If you're going to do the Read-Aim-Fire version, where before you go out and submit your SBIR, you're talking to corporates and asking questions, then you definitely will want to file a provisional patent around that. So I would recommend, if it's a university, I'd recommend talking to the tech transfer office and getting a strategy around this. If it's outside of a university, then talk to a patent attorney and make sure you understand the processes around IP. And there's pros and cons of every decision. So I think you just have to take solid legal counsel there and develop a strategy that makes sense.
And that's all our questions, Eric.
All right. Well, thank you, Jackie, and thank you everybody for your time today.